Welcome back. We're in class 3, and this is segment 1 of setting limits and building cooperation. And in this segment, I want to talk a little more about what drives children off track. Because I think if we understand what's going on with our child, it gives us another 20% of patience that we need to actually begin setting limits, bringing the limit, and then stay listening. And the initiative we need to set up special time so that we get better and better connected with our children. So I'm glad you've been using these tools. I hope you found some success with them. When you're first learning something, you don't succeed all the time, ever. No one does. So if you've had a few difficult times making special time work, or seeing how it works, or having stay listening work well for you, in particular lasting through a child's long cry, don't be discouraged. These are not easy skills. These are skills that our parents did not necessarily have. And if they didn't have them, it just makes it a little bit of a harder climb into getting comfortable with bringing the limit, offering special time, and doing stay listening when your child's feelings are high. So here's the picture of why children go off track with a little more information for you about it. When children go off track, it could be for two reasons. It could be that they just got hurt. Something just happened to them that felt hurtful, that made them feel disconnected. Either you had to go do something and they felt disconnected because you were not there, or something harsh or difficult happened to them, unexpected, and it was a little too sudden, a little too much, a little too scary, and their prefrontal cortex turned off. Children signal immediately when this happens. So an example of this is a friend of mine who is not a parent, was visiting some parents, friends of his, and they had a little 18-month-old boy. And the daddy was, walking the little boy around on his shoulders, and they were visiting. The parents were talking to this friend, and the little boy suddenly grabbed his daddy's hair and pulled hard. And the father got restimulated. It's like his feelings came up quickly. And without even thinking, without a second's notice, he gave his child a slap, not a hard one, but certainly a slap, whipped him down off of his shoulders and said, "Don't do that to me, that hurt," and put him down on the ground fast. And that response, and the child didn't cry at all. The child just kind of toddled off as if nothing had happened. But the friend noted, whoa, that probably scared this poor little boy who didn't know that his daddy was going to react that way. Maybe the little boy lost his sense of connection when the adults were all talking. And maybe then his impulse to pull his daddy's hair couldn't be controlled because he wasn't, his mind wasn't coordinated at that point. But he certainly didn't mean harm. And the father didn't mean harm either. It's like his feelings got triggered. He snapped into reactive mode. He doesn't mean to be harsh with his child. He's a good daddy. But boom, 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 these things happened. And this friend thought, gee, I wonder if the little boy's okay. So 5 minutes later, he went over and kind of got down at the little boy's level, and he just smiled and he said, "How are you doing? What would you like to do?" And sort of just made an offer of, "I'm here to pay attention. Show me what you want." The little boy came over, looked him straight in the eye, and slapped him across the face. Just like that. And what happens is that when children are frightened or surprised or overwhelmed by harsh or thoughtless behavior, reactive behavior on the part of other children or on the part of grown-ups, as soon as someone's paying attention, how they signal you that their mind is not working well and that they need help is to show you off-track behavior. And this little boy showed the exact same off-track behavior that he was just the victim of to this friendly friend who was trying to help. So children go off track sometimes because something just happened that shut their mind down. And exactly how they go off track, sometimes you can figure out why. It's very easy to figure out why in that situation. And sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have no idea why your child will not stop sucking her thumb. Or sometimes you have no idea why your child refuses the orange juice that they just asked for. You don't have time to figure it out. You're a parent. You're doing many, many things. It's okay. You just need to know that sometimes it comes from something that really just happened, a disconnection that was, 3 seconds ago. But many other times, your child gets disconnected because something innocent and innocuous in their present situation restimulates feelings that they've been storing for a while over something that happened a long time ago, 3 weeks ago, yesterday, this morning. What happens is that when you have stored emotions from times you've gotten disconnected or times you've felt hurt, those stored emotions are being held in place by a lot of brain energy. But what they do is they throw out, it's a little bit like a grenade. They kind of throw out little threads. And what happens is that the sights and the sounds and the smells and just all the factual information that your child was trying to process while this little incident that hurt them was happening are all stored in there, and they're all mixed up with emotion, mixed up with sadness or anger or frustration, some upset. And because the information can't be processed, they can't, if they got scared by a dog who bounded up to them when they were, 1.5, and they had no idea that they were safe, it didn't look safe at all, and they cried, but you stopped them from crying, you stopped them from expressing the emotion that went with the incident, they now have ears and fur and a tail and 4 feet all glommed in together with, I'm in danger, I'm small, how am I going to live through this situation? So feelings and facts are all gummed up together. So for instance, if your child, having had that experience 6 months later, sees a little rabbit with fur and ears and 4 feet, that is sleeping in a cage and can't possibly get out, your child could have a huge panic about that, because the sight of things that remind them of something that was difficult then triggers the information that they're trying to get at. How is it to be with something that has fur and 4 feet, and eyes and a tail, and the feelings that went with a difficult situation. So they can't access any information without bringing the whole feeling up. So they can look at a rabbit and scream and run away. Although the rabbit is no threat whatsoever, they can't tell. Because once the feeling floods their system, there is no fact on the outside that really has any effect. What's running the show is the emotions. What's running the show is a replay of that difficult experience. This is restimulation. And restimulation is the cause of probably, I would guess, 80 to 90% of the times that children go off track. So I'm going to give you several examples so you can begin to picture this. But what we need to know in the beginning here is that children are so sensitive from before birth on. Every single thing that happens is recorded, and they know very little about what's going on. So it's easy for them to feel overwhelmed. It's easy for them to feel like they might be in danger, although they might not. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not in danger at all. If you're 2 weeks old and a screen door slams hard suddenly, you don't know that that's just part of what summer is like at mom and dad's house, and that it means nothing. It could put a huge fright into a little infant. And therefore, every time the screen door slams, there's a big reaction, because the first time it slammed, this child had no information, and it was startling, and someone put a pacifier in their mouth so they couldn't process the whole thing through, thinking that that was a kindness. It looks like that's a kindness, but it doesn't allow children to understand that although they were scared, they have recovered. And so there's a healing process that we can use to help infants from becoming so vulnerable to restimulation, to having old feelings kicked up. But some examples are, once I was talking with a mom who, after a talk I gave, came up and said, I don't know what to do with my little girl. She's 14 months old, and every time I try to brush her teeth, she sweats and she arches, and I have to be really careful not to drop her because she's arching like a little fish flipping out of my arms, and it's dangerous, and she sweats and cries and struggles, and I have no idea It's like she never got hurt by a toothbrush. Why would this be happening? And so I just started asking the mom, okay, well, did she have a difficult birth? No, it was wonderful birth. It was easy. We were together right afterwards. There was no separation. She, it didn't take long. She kind of slid right out, as births go anyway. And I said, well, has she ever had medical treatment that was painful, or did she ever have an accident? And the mom says, no, we've never had an accident. And then she talked to me for another 3 minutes about, this is so difficult, and why would this be, and what should she do? And then all of a sudden her face lit up and she went, oh my gosh, I know what it might be. When she was 8 months old, I was playing with her, but I had a cup of hot coffee, and I got jostled and the coffee spilled on her arm, and we did have to go to the emergency room, and it was a bad burn, and she did have to be treated, and she was crying like crazy. And they had to put her on a papoose board in order to give her the treatment that she needed. So that means strapping a child down, arms and legs. And I just kind of nodded and said, probably the prospect of having her body invaded by a toothbrush is restimulating the feelings that came from that painful and then overwhelming experience where grown-ups are doing things to you that you don't understand, that they don't ask permission to do. It's all rush, rush, quick, quick, this, that, in a strange environment. And so that's just one example of how a very innocuous moment in everyday life can trigger big old feelings of an overwhelming experience. So what I suggested that the mom do is just do the same thing at night, except plan for 20 minutes or half an hour of listening. It's like pick your daughter up, maybe do a little special time before to really reinforce the connection that you have, and say, sweetie, here's the toothbrush. We're going to need to brush your teeth. And then let her do the healing. And you can tell her she's safe. You can tell her no one's going to hurt her. You can tell her, and when she starts slowing down, the crying begins to fade. Are you ready for me to put the toothbrush in your mouth? And then allow her to, basically you allow her to be scared, and you allow her to react, and you allow her to protest, as long as she feels that she needs to do that. And when she's done, and you could even postpone toothbrushing for a night or 2 or 3, much better if the toothbrushing happens because she says, okay, than to force her to undergo it again, sort of making one more time when grown-ups have overwhelmed her. And my guess would be that it wouldn't take too long before she could actually agree, or at least say, I want to do it, grab it and do it herself. Another example, my son, my second son, had an accident that scared us all when he was 1 year old. He was just 1, and it was an accident out in the yard while I was doing something else. His hand got very badly cut, and it was bled like crazy, and it was a huge wound on a little boy. And we rushed him to the hospital, to the emergency room, and he had to be strapped down in order to get stitched up. They gave him some medication, and it was a 3-hour ordeal. Not fun for a little 1-year-old, not whatever, a parent wants to have happen. And he didn't cry about it except during the time, and afterwards he kind of, his whole self was a little stunned for about a week. He cried about it every now and then, but there wasn't very much crying. He was just figuring out that he was okay now. But after that time, when he would be out in the yard and he would just scuff his knee a little bit, just a little scuff, not a lot, no blood, then he would look down at his knee. He would see that there was no blood. He'd look at me to see if I was paying attention. And if I was, if I made eye contact and I said, oh, David, oops, then he would cry like crazy. He would just go into a huge reaction. And I would hold him and I would let him flip and struggle and sweat. And he would scream and say, you're hurting me, you're hurting me, you're hurting me. And what I tended to do, because I wanted him to see that there was nothing threatening in the present environment, was to hold him with this arm. And I'd hold my hand up like this and I'd say, David, you can see my hand. My hand is not going to hurt you. You're safe right here. I'm guarding you. And he wouldn't look at me very much, but every time he looked at me, he would just go back in and cry really, really hard and squirm and sweat, working through the terror of that experience. But if he was out in the yard and he would actually scrape his knee and there was blood, he would pale. He would look down, he'd see the blood, he would pale, and he wouldn't be able to cry because it was too much like that overwhelming experience. If there was any blood, he couldn't work on the feelings. But if there was no blood, it was safe enough. He felt sure enough that things were okay, that he could cry and cry and cry about this restimulation of an old experience. There's another story that I'll tell you about a restimulation that caused a child to be off track in the sleep department. One of our instructors is a single mom, and her daughter had been sleeping with her, but was 6 years old now, and she just decided that she really wanted her own bed and that her daughter needed her own bed too. So it was an arbitrary decision on the part of the mom for better sleep for herself, and she thought it would really help foster her daughter's independence and her sense of being well in the world without being glued to mommy. So she proposed, she told her daughter, tonight, I'm not going to sleep in bed with you. Tonight, I'm going to sleep in this other bed in the same room. And the daughter cried at the news of it. She had a big cry about, Mommy, you can't do that. I want you near me. And when it came bedtime, the same thing happened. She cried and cried and cried with her mommy sitting on the bed instead of lying in the bed with her, sitting on the bed, holding her hand and saying, I'll just be a little ways away. I'm right with you. And the daughter crying and crying and crying. And I think that night it wound up that the daughter cried as long as the mom could listen, and then she couldn't listen anymore, but the daughter couldn't say, okay, Mommy, sleep in that bed. So the mom went ahead and slept with her daughter as usual, not wanting to force the issue, wanting to listen long enough that the child could work through the issue so that she could agree, okay, Mommy, it's time you can go in the other bed. So that was how that mom decided to proceed. So the next night, her daughter was even more beside herself. She was screaming that night, really very loud. It sounded more like working on fear instead of sadness. So there was a lot of thrashing around and clinging and don't go, and the mom would just keep kind of peeling her daughter a little bit away from her and saying, you're still safe. I'm not going to be very far away, just a little ways away, and allowing her daughter to process her feelings about this. The third night, her daughter was really all over the place. She was sweating, she was trembling. It was a very, very intense healing process that she was going through. And somewhere in the first 20 minutes, her daughter started saying, ouch, Mommy, ouch, ouch, the bee sting, it hurts, it hurts. And her mom thought, oh, maybe all this fear has to do with her getting stung by a bee this summer. I wonder if that's it. Because all of a sudden the topic changed from don't go sleep in that bed to the bee sting. So the mom thought, I'm getting a clue here. So she began touching the place on her daughter's leg where the bee had stung her and just saying, oh, sweetie, I think it's healed. I'm gonna touch it now. And her daughter going, no, Mommy, not there. The bee sting here, the bee sting here. And she pointed to the back of her right hand, frantically, trying to, Mommy, it hurts, help me. And her mom touched her hand and said, sweetie, I'm right here. I've got my hand on your hand. I'm right here. Nothing bad is going to happen to you. And her daughter cried and sweated and trembled and cried and sweated and trembled. And then it dawned on the mom, oh my gosh, when she was 1 day old, she had jaundice and they needed to test her blood. And she was dehydrated. They needed to give her fluids. And the person who was trying to put the IV in her little hand, her little 1 day old hand, was not practiced at working with babies and stuck her 8 different times on that right hand before she finally got the IV in. And she had screamed all the way through that. And the mom just went, oh my gosh, the root of these fears about me being apart from her come from the first day of her life when I had to be there and watch, that needle going in 8 different times in order to help her medically. So the things that your child is getting upset about, the things that send them off track, may look like they've just happened. And they may indeed have just happened. But many, many times the root of the large amount of emotion that's coming out of your child when you bring a very small, very reasonable limit is from an early experience that they couldn't process. They had no way of processing it. They were too little, they didn't understand it, it overwhelmed them. They stored it away and went on as best they could, but it has driven their behavior off track many, many times. And in order for the behavior that goes off track to be healed, to be relieved, so that they can be much more cooperative, much more in tune with you and the other people in the family, much more eager to be in good communication with everybody, much more able to share, much more able to be flexible. They need to get in and dig out some of these old feelings that keep driving them off track, because little tiny things that need to be done every day kick up these big fears, these big feelings of overwhelm, these big feelings of anger or upset or insult. So, and parents get restimulated too. We get restimulated every single day. Some of us get restimulated every single time we look at one of our children. It's like, especially if they've been giving us a hard time, every time we look at them, we go on our guard. We associate this child with this number of difficult times that we've had where we haven't had the ability to offload the feelings associated with those times. And oftentimes the things that happen with our children day to day also kick up for us things that happened in our childhood that were overwhelming. One of our instructors, for instance, was playing baseball when she was 12. She was the catcher, and she got smacked right in the mouth with a bat. It knocked out her 4 front teeth. It was a huge accident. It was very painful, sudden, surprising, and her mother acted like it was nothing. Her mother was coarse, crude, late to come, acted like it was a real insult to her that she should have to come and take care of this. So it was not only very painful and shocking and a loss physically, but there was harshness and neglect that went along with it. And so when she's playing with her children, she has to tell them, you cannot get anywhere near my face. If you get anywhere near my face or my mouth, I'm going to react. I'm going to be hard on you. I just can't help it. So she's done lots and lots of listening partnership time, offloading all of the feelings that came from that incident so that she's not so vulnerable there. But she knows herself well, and she hasn't finished that work. So she makes sure that she keeps her head and her face out of any wrestling match or any playful interaction with children, so that they can't accidentally smack her in the mouth. And she can't accidentally, react in a way that is kind of almost beyond her control, that she wouldn't choose. I think another example, a teen example, is that one of our instructors felt like she was doing a pretty good job as a mom. She felt like she was in good with her daughter, things were going well, and then her daughter turned 14, and within a span of just a few months, she felt really distant from her daughter. She felt like she didn't know her daughter anymore. She felt like she wasn't being a good mom. It's like her whole feel of parenting changed pretty dramatically within a fairly short period of time. She just felt off kilter, and she didn't have a feel for things anymore. And when she went to listening partnership to talk about, what was wrong with her daughter, why her daughter couldn't connect with her, her listening partner asked, well, what was going on for you when you were 14? And she thought for a minute, and she just went, oh, And what had happened was her mother had committed suicide when she was 14. And from then on, she didn't have a mom. And so the act itself was shocking and very, very painful. It was a huge loss in her life, not understandable in any way. But it also meant that she hadn't had a mom from that point on. So it was easy for her then to see, oh, I've lost my feel for mothering because I wasn't mothered. I was just full of, sorrow and just not understanding what was going on. So when she began working, once again, not the first time in her life, on her sorrow about losing her mom in such a shocking and ununderstandable way. Her relationship with her daughter much improved. She didn't feel like it was, something her daughter was doing. It just felt like, it was something that she had power over. She could offload her feelings and reach out, and they do well together. Another example is one of our dads just told us this story this Christmas. He said when he was a dad and his children were small, the thing that really ticked him off about Christmas, that put him in a bad mood for weeks every Christmas, was having to get a Christmas tree. He said it just spoiled the whole month for him, the whole idea of getting a Christmas tree. And he said once he got to listening partnerships, he began to understand why it was such a big issue for him. It was a big issue because his dad had been a total perfectionist about the Christmas tree. And his dad was almost never around. He was always working, very distant. And then Christmas would come, and he would drag the children, this father in particular, from one Christmas tree lot to the next, looking for the perfect tree. And it would be, 10 trips to the Christmas tree lot, and endless, measuring and looking and thinking and comparing. And it was just a chore that this dad had never enjoyed. He resented his dad. It's like, so you're never around, and then when you're around, you're such a total, picky guy about how our Christmas tree has to be. What about me? What about being with me? It's like there was no connection there. There was just this chore that had to be done that was endless. So once he figured that out, what he and his family did was to get a tree, and then they left the tree up for a whole year. And they decorated it with Valentine's, and they decorated it for spring, and they decorated it for 4th of July, and they decorated it for Halloween. And meanwhile, he kept looking at the tree and using it as a way to go in after feelings about his dad, so that he could shed some of the resentment and some of the feeling victimized, so that he could not be distracted by the Christmas tree in a different way than his father was distracted, but still distracted and kind of emotionally upset, by that part of Christmas. So those are, and I guess I'll give one more example, because it speaks actually to a frequent occurrence in families where a child wants one parent and almost ignores the other parent. This is a story of a family in which the father is a performer, and he's on the road performing a lot of the time. He goes off on 2-week and 3-week trips to perform in Europe or to perform on the other side of the country. It's like he's very occupied with his work. And so his little 3.5 or 4-year-old daughter really wouldn't give him the time of day. It's like it was always mommy this and mommy that, and if she hurt herself or wanted a story at bedtime, it was, I want mommy to do it. She wants her nose wiped, I want mommy to do it. She needs her shoes, put on, I want mommy to do it. So he was really feeling like the fifth wheel in their family, parenting-wise, and had no idea what to do. He thought, well, she's close to mommy, she's not close to me, I guess that's the way it is. But we began bringing Parenting by Connection to the little school where their child goes. And we did a play event, and in the middle of the play event, she wanted something, and mommy was in the other room and daddy was right there, and I happened to be nearby, and daddy started doing what she wanted, and she burst into tears and jumped up and down, crying and crying, I need mommy, I need mommy. And mommy came running, but I just said, why don't we let daddy be the listener here? You stay here and pay attention. It's really, really good you're here. But let's let daddy be the one who moves in here. Let's let daddy be the one who's physically close. So daddy stayed right next to her. He didn't hold her. He didn't, pick her up. She was doing great. She was offloading all kinds of feelings, just jumping up and down and sweating and I want my mommy, I want my mommy. But she wasn't running into her mommy's arms. She was just, ready to climb out of her skin because mommy wasn't coming to her. And daddy kept telling her, I'm right here. I can help you. I'm right here. Mommy's here too, but this time I'm going to help you. And the child just kept on going, kept on being beside herself, because mommy wasn't running to her rescue, and daddy was proposing that he help. He didn't have to do much. She was in charge of the whole experience. And after about 45 minutes, she began to sort of settle herself, and she wanted to go potty. So her daddy, proposed to pick her up and take her to potty. And then she had another big cry about, no, 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 you can't do it. Mommy needs to do it. And I just said, let's let this play itself out. She's having lots of feelings. But there's nothing unsafe with daddy proposing to take her to the potty. This is a perfectly reasonable thing to offer. So daddy didn't force taking her to the potty. He just said, when you're ready, I'll take you. Are you ready? And he held out his hand, and she'd jump up and down and sweat and cry some more. And when she was finished, when she didn't need to cry anymore, she said, Daddy, please take me to the potty. And he picked her up and he brought her there, and they did their business and they came back, and she didn't want to get out of his arms. And mommy came up, she let the two of them go off to the potty, and they came back, and she walked over, and her daughter looked at her, then looked back at her daddy, and just stayed very content in her daddy's arms. And any time in the year before that, she would have leaned out and wanted her daddy and, kind of thrown herself out of his arms into her arms. But because she'd had this great cleansing, let's get all of these I can't live without mommy feelings out, she was content in her daddy's arms. And he told me later it was one of the 4 peak experiences in his whole life, to have their relationship turn around, a total turnaround in her ability to see him as a resource, and her ability to feel close to him, and her ability to feel his love in that 1 hour's worth of offloading the desperation around needing it to be mommy. Lots and lots of separation feelings in there, just why is daddy going, what happened here. I'm sure some of that was underneath. But so those are some examples of how just a situation where daddy proposes, for instance, to be the resource, restimulates all the times he wasn't there, all the times it was only mommy there, all the times there was one resource and one resource only. And the feelings of desperation that come from that, get cleansed out, so that the off-track behavior, the I can't be with daddy, it has to be mommy, gets healed. So I hope that gives you some picture of how restimulation works, how any little tiny thing can kick up big feelings that come from the deep past, as well as feelings that come from yesterday or 2 hours ago or 3 minutes ago. And that offering a limit on the off-track behavior and just making a proposal, bringing the limit or bringing the expectation, allows a child a healing opportunity and can really clear their behavior, sometimes bit by bit, sometimes, as in the case of the little girl whose daddy was away a lot, 1 hour of a really good stay listening session can turn a whole relationship around for a child.